Hey, it's Monet and Jen, and we are super excited you are here. Today, we are going to hear from Jen about her birth story and why she became a birth photographer. So, buckle up and get ready for a really fun. Wait, start again.
Buckle up. Have you been listening to Texas Hold'em too
I guess
much?
so. So- All right, okay, let's start again.
We're gonna get real
Uh,
punchy real quick here. I
I
don't know.
know.
I don't know if this is gonna
Okay.
do it or not.
We'll see. We'll give it a try. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. It's Monet and Jen, and we are super excited because Jen is going to share her birth story with us today. We're going to hear about her first birth and how it impacted her decision to become a birth photographer and how it still influences every birth she attends. So, thanks for being here, and we can't wait to hear your feedback after you listen. Hi, it's Monet and Jen, and we are the co founders of Birth Becomes You. We are birth photographers and doulas with over 10 years of experience. We've attended over 1,000 births collectively. We started Birth Becomes You to create a safe space for new and experienced birth photographers to share and grow. We aim to equip and empower birth workers to feel confident in the birth space and take beautiful, world changing images. We believe in a world where birth is visible, where shame is absent, where fear is translated to power, and where each individual's experience is honored as valid and valued. We are so glad you're here, and we can't wait to learn and connect with you.
All right. Thank you for being here. So my birth photography journey started a long time ago. My daughter was born in 2011, and like many birth workers, my traumatic birth with her brought me into birth photography and the birth world. So we're just going to talk a little bit about that. So in 2011, when I got pregnant, I was really excited to give birth. Pregnancy was hard for me, and I was kind of sick a lot and I didn't feel great, but I was never scared to give birth necessarily. I was more excited about it. And I knew right away that I wanted to give birth outside of the hospital system if I possibly could. And there was one birth center in Denver at that time. And so we visited the birth center right in my first trimester, and we liked it a lot and immediately decided that's where our care was going to be. And my husband and I just kind of moved forward from there. Every week, I enjoyed going, meeting the midwives. There were four midwives, so you were kind of always trying to meet each one and get to know each midwife so that they could, meet you, understand your family and your preferences. And I really enjoyed the whole process up until like 40 weeks. And it was right on my due date or really close to it. I woke up that morning and I just felt very anxious and emotional and sad and tearful. I don't really know what caused it aside from my mom had me and my sister both at 42 weeks. So I started just kind of worrying that maybe I was going to be pregnant up until 42 weeks and then I would have to transfer out of the birth center and then I have to be induced, and it was just this whole like thing that was kind of playing out in my head. And so when I went to my appointment that day, I told the midwife, I said, I'm just having a lot of anxiety. I'm really nervous. I don't want to, be overdue and have to be induced and all the things. And she kind of said, don't worry about it. We're going to take it a day at a time. And, we have a lot of things that we can do to help, induce you if you do go to, 41, 42 weeks. Like there are things. And she took my blood pressure at that time and it was a little high. And so that, of course, if you know anything about birth centers, cannot deliver with a high blood pressure because, of course, they worry about preeclampsia or anything else kind of happening. So,
Jen, do you remember how high it was? Like, do you
yeah,
remember?
yeah, it was like right around the 140 over 90, which was their like
Cut
cutoff.
off.
But I worked in healthcare all of my life. And so I was watching them take the blood pressure, and it was a little under 140 over 90, but that's kind of where it hovered. And so they said, well, we're concerned about that. Did not have any high blood pressures up until this point. So maybe it's because you're anxious, or maybe there's something else going on. And so they sent me home with a 24-hour urine catch, which, if you know, is literally you pee every single time you pee, you pour it into a jug for 24 hours. And then they test that to make sure that there is no protein in your urine. And if there is, then, and it goes beyond, a certain amount, then you're at risk for pre-E and you need to potentially transfer at that point. So I did that for 24 hours, and I remember going back to return it. And it was not an appointment. I was just dropping off this jug of my pee, and my whole goal was to just walk in, drop it off, walk out, and just let the test determine what was going to happen. If I really did need to go to the hospital, and if I did have protein in my urine, then that's probably where I should deliver anyway. So I was just kind of hoping I could leave it up to the test, essentially. But one of the midwives saw me leaving and she said, "Let's get a blood pressure real quick." And immediately, like, I could just feel like my heart just pumping. And I was immediately nervous and I was already anxious just walking in there. And so I just knew it was not going to be good at that very moment. Tried to do all the things like calm myself down, lay down, put feet up, take deep breaths, all of it. And it was the same blood pressure reading, and even maybe a little bit lower than it was before because, as I said, I worked in healthcare. And so I would look at the cuff and I could see, when the line was kind of like pulsing. But she immediately said, "Well, you got to go." And she was just very careless about how she transferred me from their care. It wasn't like, "I'm really sorry that this happened to you. We're going to help you facilitate this transfer." Like, it wasn't anything like that. She just walked out of the room and said, "She's got to go." And I could hear her saying that to the receptionist. And I just felt completely dismissed by the birth center. Like, I had spent 9 months going to all these appointments, and I loved them and I loved how they treated us. And I just felt like it was such a great place. And then the second that there was something wrong with me and my body, I was just dismissed. And I felt awful. My husband wasn't there. I didn't have any support. I was just dropping off my pee jug and ended up transferring. At
Well, and
that
it
point,
feels like, I mean, just to say, like, I mean, it just feels like you didn't even have a choice. Like, it just felt like you were almost, I think now as experienced birth workers and as people, we've both given birth, several times is like, I think we both would have been like, hey, actually, like, I don't want to, let's wait for this test to come back. Like, I don't want to check my blood pressure right now. Let's do it. And I mean, all of those things were just taken away from you. And it was almost like you knew you weren't in a good position emotionally, which we know can affect blood pressure. And you didn't have a choice. And then it was like she almost treated you as if it was some kind of emergency, like not even
yeah,
giving you the time to like process what was happening emotionally. I'm really sorry. Yeah,
yeah.
it's hard.
No, it was hard. And it was, I mean, they wanted to send me to the hospital right then. And the one thing that I kept coming back to was I felt fine. Like, I actually felt better at the end of my pregnancy than I did any other time during pregnancy. I had energy, I didn't have headaches. I didn't have the other things that plagued me throughout pregnancy. And so I felt really good and I didn't feel like there was anything wrong. And to kind of fast forward, the urine test did come back within normal limits, which made the whole thing just worse. I mean, the
Mm,
whole thing so much worse.
yeah.
So I advocated to go the next day, and I asked the midwife to do a sweep, not the midwife that dismissed me, but another midwife. She kind of said, "I'm really sorry that this is happening. Do you want to try to do a sweep to see if we can get things going tonight?" And I was like, "Yes, let's do that." So we did a membrane sweep. And then I went to meet the midwives at the hospital. The birth center really wanted to place me with an OB, but I really pushed back against that. And so we ended up with the hospital midwives, which were okay, but still, it wasn't what you were planning, and you didn't know these people and they didn't know you. So it wasn't what we had envisioned at all. And so we went in for the induction, and it took all day, like inductions do. I was 3 centimeters when I went in. And after like 18 hours of Pitocin induced contractions with a baby who was posterior, like sunny side up, and my contractions just kept coupling and kind of like every time I would have one, it would kind of go away, but then the pain in my back would just like increase. And so I never felt like I got a break. So after about 18 hours, the midwife said, we're seeing not great variability with your daughter on the monitor or with your baby on the monitor. At that time, we didn't know if she was a boy or girl. And she's having some D cells. And so you either need to get an epidural and see if that will like help you rest and maybe she will be able to like recover a little bit, or we're going to have to do a C-section. And so, of course, I got the epidural. Also, in my mind, I kind of figured that we were leaning toward going to a C-section, or at least they were. So I didn't want to end up under general. So I just got the epidural thinking, well, this will be good if I have to have a C-section at least. This isn't one thing that's going to hang me up. So I got an epidural, D cells continued. We pretty quickly went to a C-section. And I remember laying on the C-section table and looking up at the ceiling. And they had these like drop ceilings, and they had like a painting on one of the like squares on the ceiling that was like a rainbow and flowers and puffy clouds and blue sky. And all I could think of was like, this isn't enough to like make me feel better about what's happening in the moment. I didn't feel seen at all. I was just laying on that table. I just felt like a body on a table that they were removing something out of. The doctors and nurses were talking about their day. Nobody was talking about me. Nobody was talking about my baby or explaining what was happening. My husband was just trying to like tell me everything. All I could really see was straight up. And I remember hearing her being born, and she cried, and I could hear my husband like crying. And he said, "It's a girl. She's so beautiful. She's so beautiful." But they never showed her to me, even though she was crying and fine. My husband really had to like fight to get her brought to me so I could see her and have skin to skin. And I just remember that whole time just feeling invisible during my own birth. And I kid you not, it was laying on that table where I thought to myself, every person needs to be seen giving birth if they want to. And I wanted to. And I didn't need to be seen with necessarily photos. Like I just wanted to see my own birth, and I didn't. And so in my head, I was like, we need to have birth photography so people can see what it looks like to give birth. So you can see your own baby coming out of your body, especially if you can't feel it. And so for me, it was really those moments that I shifted my career and decision to, I was an entrepreneur before I had given birth. I was a photographer. I also worked for the hospital system as a contractor. So I kind of did two separate things. And for me, meshing like photography and birth together was kind of like those two worlds kind of colliding. Like I had worked in the hospital all of my adult life, and photography was this thing that I loved, and I was trying to like move in that direction. And so combining them just felt like the right thing. It was like this kind of epiphany. I call my daughter my muse because she gave me those moments and that like idea in my head. So this was in 2011, and it took a little while to like, adjust with what you're doing. You just had a baby, you're still processing all of that. Plus, I had weddings that I was scheduled to photograph, and I had a contract for 6 months with the hospital. So I was still doing my hospital work as well. So it was about 18 months after that that I really started moving forward into birth work. And I found I one of my friends asked me to photograph her birth. She knew that I was, stepping into this space and trying to see if this was the right decision and move for my life. And so she kind of gave me that gift of like, here, just come photograph my birth, and we'll just kind of see if this is something that you want to do. And of course, I absolutely loved it. And I never looked back after that moment. And so from 2013 until now, I have been doing birth photography. It's my full-time job. My daughter is now 12. She knows that, this is her origin story as much as it's my own. And she loves that she was able to I mean, I like to say to her, like, you gave me this gift of, sharing birth photography with my clients and with the world. And I'm really grateful for the birth experience that I had, even though it is absolutely not what I wanted at that time or would wish for anybody, mostly because I felt like all of my decisions were taken from me. But I was given, this amazing thing at the end, which is my beautiful baby and this vision of where I needed to go moving forward.
That's beautiful, Jen. I think that sometimes our hardest moments lead us to something that's really transformational. And it sounds like that's exactly what happened with Magnolia's birth. And I love what you said about how every person deserves to see their birth and to be seen during their birth. I'm part of that very large labor and delivery nurses Facebook group, which I glean a lot of great information from. And the other day, there was a conversation in there about if their hospital allowed photos or video during birth. And so many nurses were sharing that their hospitals did not permit or did not allow this to take place. And I got really mad. And I try to, keep my comments to a minimum because I'm not a labor and delivery nurse. Obviously, it's not my group. But as someone who works with in this community, I had to say something. And I don't think people understand, not, I think some people do, but I think a lot of people, especially people that work in birth and who see birth every day. And for them, it's like another, of course, they treat their compassion, their patients with care and compassion, but it is a job for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that they forget that this is such a singular experience for this family and for this person, and that everybody deserves the opportunity or the option to see their body give birth. And we really, yes, of course, there's a higher, potentially, they say there's a higher risk of liability. I don't really believe that, but that's their reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
But that's centering the hospital. It's centering the hospital's financial situation, and it's not centering the person who's giving birth. And I just imagine, like, in your situation where you felt like you lost all choice and autonomy, how different that could have felt if you had if you had a birth photographer that could have come back in the OR with you to document how much you were doing, how much work you were, the courage that you had to go back in the OR and give birth in a way that was completely different than you had planned for. I wonder how much that would have changed your experience in the moment, and then of course
Yeah.
obviously your experience postpartum. And I'm sure it's probably really hard and triggering for you when you go to births and you aren't allowed to go back in the OR, or you aren't allowed to document a certain part of it because you've been there. Like you remember what it feels like to not have that part of your story validated and seen and recognized for how important it actually is.
Yeah, it absolutely. And I feel like I can't believe we're still kind of like pushing to like be able to document these moments. It's been 12 years since, I mean, my daughter is 12. And so I just can't believe that we're still like fighting for this. And it was the first C-section that I documented, that really kind of gave me some insight into what my own birth looked like. And
Yes.
I happened to be pregnant with my second at the time, and it was a twin birth. And the clients, of course, were trying to have a vaginal birth. And for whatever reason, multiple reasons, that did not work out. And they did have to have a C-section. And I remember being able to go back and just being like, wow, okay, like this is how Magnolia was brought into the world. And I didn't even see it. I didn't have any like real knowledge of what that looked like until I stepped into that space. Even though I was in the space and it happened to me, really can't see anything when you're just laying, flat on your back. That curtain is right there. You have no visual other than looking up and maybe a little bit to the side. And so being in that OR space, the doctor was very comfortable with me being there. He was like, walk around, make it your home or whatever. I mean, I really think he used those words, and I was just like blown away by that. And he was like, you can come on this side of the curtain or this side. And it just gave me the freedom to like document, but also to see what my experience, probably looked like.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that was really important for me. And I was just bawling the whole time, just trying to take pictures and, trying to do my job. But I was happy for them. I was happy for myself to be able to see this. And I was so grateful to be in that space with them because I was really worried that they were going to say no. But the doctor knew how important it was to that client, and he made sure that, she got the photos she needed. I still have never been in a C-section that's been that open to letting me move around in the space.
Wow.
I mean, he gave me a gift because it was that birth that at least allowed me to feel like, okay, if my second child has to be born by C-section, at least I kind of know what that looks like now.
Right.
But she didn't. I did have a VBAC. It was hard fought, but she was born by a VBAC. So
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, I love what you shared too about how being able to witness that, being able to document that really helped you in some ways heal from your first birth. And I think that's one of the coolest parts about birth photography is that obviously not everyone's going to hire a birth photographer. It may not be feasible for 1,000 different reasons for every person to hire a birth photographer. But those images, like they not only can bring healing to the families that we document, they can bring healing to
mhm.
people that are all over the world that maybe had a similar birth story. And, I have people, I'm sure you experience this too, Jenn, who will comment on my post and be like, I'm a grandma, but 40 years ago, I had a C-section and this is the first time I'm seeing what that looked like. And it's bringing me back to my own birth experience and it's providing me healing and understanding in ways that I didn't think were possible. And so it's a really cool ripple effect, right? It's not just that singular birth gallery for that family. It's, potentially, if of course they're willing for us to share them, it's the ripple effect and other people can see, whoa, this reminds me of my own birth story, or this prepares me for what maybe I will have to walk down eventually or potentially. It does have this really beautiful ripple effect.
And it allows people to know what they can ask for their own birth
Yes,
and advocate
absolutely.
for. I want my
Absolutely.
photographer to be back there. I want somebody to take pictures. Or, I had a recent birth story where the mom was able to pull her own baby out from her C-section. And so it was a maternal assisted cesarean birth. And since she did that, I've had so many people reach out to me and say, how do I do that? Who is the doctor? What hospital? Where can we do this, near us? And so, just as we've said, like these photos are so transformational, not only for the families, but for the world and making
Absolutely.
birth visible for everyone and accessible in a lot of ways for everyone too.
Absolutely. And I mean, I know nurses look at these birth images, anesthesiologists look at these birth images, OBs look at these birth images. When we first started out, it was very hard to get back in the OR here in Denver. You remember this, Jenn. It was kind of like, we never knew. And we'd have
Yeah.
to, if we got back, it was like a hard won fight. We had to push really hard to get back into the OR.
Yeah.
And since then, 10 years later, I am probably I'm in a C-section probably once a month, and I get back every single time, no question. Because once people start seeing these images and start realizing, hey, like, wait, there are certain ORs that are allowing this, like it seems to be
hmm
working, it seems to be increasing, patient satisfaction. Well, maybe I can't say no to this anymore. The
hmm
excuses that they were using, there's not enough room or, infection risk, all of these things that they were using suddenly don't work when you say, but hey, I've actually been at 10 C-sections. I've been at a C-section here. Do you want to see a photo? I have pulled up images on my phone and been like, you can't tell me that people don't go back in the OR here. I've been here before. And so I think that it's making change. In Colorado, they
hmm
just enacted a state law. I didn't realize this, a state law where now they have to allow two support people to go back into every single C-section.
Wow.
It's part of the state law. The University of Colorado is changing their policy to reflect this new legal standing. And I'm just like, wow, like what incredible change and how important. Again, not everybody's going to bring a birth photographer back. They might bring a doula, they might bring a mom, they might bring a sister. But it's a lot to ask a partner who has probably never been in surgery before to occupy all of those roles, to document, to
Mhm.
support, to stand up and see something that they may not be prepared to see. It's a big surgery. And so expecting one partner to do all these things is unrealistic. And it doesn't often allow mom or the birthing person to have all the support that they need. I was in a C-section last week, and once baby was born, the dad went over to the warmer and was with their baby, which was exactly where he needed to be. But my client also needed someone to come in and hold her hand and check in on her and tell her, oh my gosh, your baby's 8 pounds, 9 ounces. He, looks beautiful. All of these things. She deserved that constant presence and that person to say, hey, you are still the center of this story. I want to make sure that you feel like you are seen and heard during this entire process. So,
Absolutely. It's so important. It's so important.
well, do you want to do a quick when should you go? And we'll do
Sure.
C-section edition because this can be tricky. So, not tricky. This can be different.
Okay.
So, I don't think this is going to be a specific scenario per se, but let's just say you have a client who is having a scheduled C-section at 9 a.m. at a local hospital, and you have been back to this hospital, I would say like the majority of the time, but they've also denied you access a few times. So when would you go to the hospital if the C-section was scheduled at 9 a.m.?
I would first ask what time my clients are supposed to be there. Usually they're going about 2 hours prior to their C-section. And here at U of M, which is the only hospital that allows birth photographers or a second person back, you have to call in. So my clients would need to call in at like 6 and make sure they could show up for their 7 o'clock time. So assuming they could go in at 7, I would probably give them from 7 to 7:30 by themselves, and then I would arrive between 7:30 and 8, just because it takes usually a little bit of time to get checked in, do paperwork. I don't need to be there for that. And it's nice for them to get settled into their like triage space and just kind of like take a breath and have a moment together before I step into the space. So usually I like to come at least an hour before the scheduled cesarean, sometimes an hour and a half.
Yeah, that's great. And we always tell people, the person that you really have to clear this with, your presence, is the anesthesiologist. They're often the person that gets to make that call, but you would be surprised that every other person you interact with does have influence. So if you can have a good rapport or relationship with your nurse, they are going to be more willing to advocate and fight for you if they like you and feel like you're going to be an added presence into the OR. So I always encourage you, you need to really put on your like kind, competent hat when you walk into the room. You need to act like you know what you're doing, that you've done this before. You want to be professional, and you want to remind your client, and I tell all of my clients this, you have to be the one that advocates for me to come back into the OR. This is your birth. You are the patient. And so if you really want me back there, I will absolutely share my competence. I will share my experience. I will be very professional. But at the end of the day, you have to fight for me to come back. And you would be
Mhm.
surprised at the difference that that can make. I've been at hospitals where I've never been back before. And if I have a client that goes in there and says, you know what, this is really important to me, I've spent thousands of dollars, I need her to come back in the OR or I'm leaving, you would be surprised at how that tune can change and providers can be willing to work with your request. So definitely make sure that you're there and that you present yourself in a way that everybody on the team is going to be comfortable with you going back to the OR. We talk a lot about this in our Facebook group. So if you haven't joined us, make sure that you join us there because we love to help birth photographers do all kinds of things, but getting back into the OR, we know how important that is. And so we really try to help as much as possible with tips and tricks to get access back into the OR.
Well, thank you all for tuning in today. And you can find out more about us, our courses, and other tools for birth photography at birthbecomesyou.com. And make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook and join our Facebook group if you are a new birth photographer or experienced birth worker. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. Find out more about us, our courses, and other tools for birth photography at birthbecomesyou.com. And make sure to follow along on Instagram and Facebook at Birth Becomes You. And if you love listening, make sure to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever you listen. Thanks. Catch you on the flip side.